I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll just come out and say it. My name is Meisner, I'm 36 years old, and yesterday I almost ruined my entire life with one stupid, careless mistake. Well, maybe it's not entirely ruined yet, but let's just say my husband Kevin isn't exactly happy with me right now. Not that he's been the picture of perfection lately either, but we'll get to that. It all started because I was venting. Okay, I was ranting. Look, everyone needs to blow off steam, right? Especially when your husband has turned into this boring, moody lump who doesn't even try anymore. I'm allowed to have feelings about that. So there I was, sitting on the couch with my two best friends, Lisa and Linda. We were halfway through a bottle of wine, and honestly, I felt great, loose, a little buzzed, and not holding back. That's what friends are for, right? I was on a roll, telling them how much Kevin has let himself go. I mean, have you seen him lately? I said, swirling my glass like I was some kind of movie star. He's got this big gut now, like he's pregnant with a keg or something. And don't even get me started on his hairline, it's like a retreating army. Every time I look at him, it's farther back. They laughed, and I laughed too, because it felt good to say it out loud. Too good, Lisa chimed in. At least he has a job though, right? My ex couldn't even hold one down. Sure, I said, rolling my eyes. But what's the point if he spends every night on the couch watching reruns of porn stars? He's like a living stereotype. I was joking, but there was a bit of edge to it. I didn't even realize how much resentment I'd been holding in until it started spilling out like that. Then I went further. I started talking about how Kevin used to be so much more. I don't know, attractive, ambitious. Back when we first got married, he'd take me on dates, surprise me with little gifts, make me feel special. Now he barely notices if I'm wearing something new, and the only thing he surprises me with is how much takeout he can eat in one sitting. And then I said the thing that still makes me cringe. Honestly, if someone else came along who actually treated me like I mattered. I might. That's when I heard it, a faint, tiny voice calling out my name. Meisner, are you there? It took me a second to process what was happening. I looked down at my phone, and my stomach dropped. Kevin's name was on the screen. My phone had somehow answered his call. And he'd been listening the whole time. Oh my God, I whispered, scrambling to hang up. But the damage was done. My friends stared at me, mouths open like they couldn't believe what just happened. And honestly, I couldn't either, for a moment. I just sat there frozen. My mind raced with a million thoughts at once. Did he hear everything? Was he still listening? And what was I supposed to do now? Call him back and try to explain, pretend it never happened. Throw my phone into the nearest lake and start a new life under a fake name. Lisa was the first to speak. Meisner, what just happened? Did he hear all of that? I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. I think so. I mean, he must have. Right, he said my name. Linda shook her head. Girl. You're in trouble, and she wasn't wrong. After a few minutes of panicked silence, I worked up the nerve to call him back. He didn't answer, which, honestly, made me feel worse. If he was angry enough to ignore me, then he must have heard enough to know I was talking trash about him. But how much did he really hear? Did he catch the part where I joked about leaving him for someone better? My stomach churned as I tried to piece it together. And then, because I'm me, I started trying to justify it to myself. I mean, was I really that wrong? Sure, maybe I shouldn't have said those things out loud, but they were true, weren't they? Kevin has changed. And not for the better. It's not like I was lying or making things up to be cruel. I was just venting, letting off some steam. Everybody does that, right? Except, this time it wasn't just my friends who heard it. By the time I finally got Kevin on the phone later that night, I was a nervous wreck. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to throw up. When he answered, his voice was cold, and I could tell right away that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Meisner, he said, cutting me off before I could even say hello. I heard what you said. I swallowed hard. Kevin, I don't. He snapped. Don't even try to explain it. I heard everything. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything. Did that mean he heard the part where I said I hated him? The part where I joked about finding someone else? I wasn't serious. I blurted out, desperate to fix it. I was just venting. You know how I get when I'm with the girls. I didn't mean any of it. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter, full of hurt. You didn't mean any of it, really, so. You don't think I'm ugly, or fat, or lazy? I didn't know what to say because honestly, I had meant some of it. Maybe not all of it, and maybe not in the cruel way it came out. But the truth was there, buried underneath the wine-fueled exaggerations and bitterness. But of course, I couldn't admit that to Kevin, not outright. Kevin, I was just frustrated, I said, my voice cracking a little. I wanted to sound apologetic, but not groveling. I still had my pride, even if it was teetering on the edge. I've been feeling overwhelmed, and I said some things I shouldn't have. It wasn't fair, and I'm sorry. There was a long pause, too long. The silence felt like it was suffocating me through the phone. I could hear him breathing, steady but heavy, and I imagined him pacing back and forth in the living room, his face twisted in that way it always did when he was really upset, but trying to stay calm. Overwhelmed, he finally said, his voice dripping with disbelief. That's your excuse, you're overwhelmed. So you tell your friends you hate me, that I'm fat and ugly? That you might leave me for someone else? That's how you deal with feeling overwhelmed? I opened my mouth to respond, but he kept going, his voice getting louder with every word. Do you even realize what that feels like, Meisner? To hear your wife, my wife, talk about me like that. Like I'm some disgusting burden she has to put up with. Now I was the one pacing back and forth across the kitchen floor, barefoot and fidgeting with the hem of my sweatshirt. I could feel the panic bubbling up in my chest, and I hated it. I hated feeling like the bad guy, even though I knew I was. But more than that, I hated that he'd heard it all. If my phone hadn't betrayed me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Kevin, I started again, forcing myself to sound calm, reasonable. I know what I said was wrong. I was venting. I was just trying to get things off my chest. I didn't mean for you to hear it, and I certainly didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, he cut in sharply. You did hurt me, Meisner, and the worst part is, I don't even think you care. That stung more than I wanted to admit. That's not true, I said, my voice rising in defense. Of course I care. Why do you think I'm trying to fix this right now? If I didn't care, I wouldn't even bother explaining myself. He let out another bitter laugh, and I could picture him shaking his head. You're not explaining yourself, you're just making excuses. And honestly, I don't think there's anything you can say that'll make this okay. The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I felt something close to real remorse. But then, as quickly as it came, it twisted into anger. Because wasn't he part of the problem too? Sure, I'd said some terrible things, but they didn't come out of nowhere. If he'd been more attentive, more present, maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to vent in the first place. You're acting like I'm the only one who's ever done anything wrong in this marriage, I shot back, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. But let's not pretend you're some perfect husband, Kevin. You've let yourself go. You barely talk to me anymore. And half the time I feel like I'm living with a roommate instead of a partner. As soon as I said it, I knew it was a mistake. I could hear it in the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, the way his silence suddenly felt colder. Heavier. Wow, he said finally, his voice quiet but deadly. You really don't get it, do you? Don't get what? I snapped, defensive now. That I'm not happy, that I'm tired of feeling ignored and unappreciated. I'm sorry if the truth hurts, Kevin, but maybe you should think about why I feel this way instead of just blaming me for everything. It was a low blow, and I knew it, but part of me felt justified because yes, I'd screwed up big time. But wasn't he at least partly responsible for the way things had gotten so bad between us? Wasn't he the one who'd stopped trying first? For a while, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable, and I could feel the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I wasn't even sure why I was crying. Was it guilt, frustration, fear, maybe all of it at once? When Kevin finally spoke again, his voice was calmer. But it didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made me feel worse. "I'm not going to argue with you, Meisner," he said. "I'm too tired for that. But I'll tell you this, you can blame me all you want, but nothing excuses what you said tonight. Nothing." And with that, he hung up. I stood there for a while, staring at the phone in my hand, the screen still lit up with the call log. I felt numb, but underneath the numbness, there was something else, a flicker of anger, maybe? Or resentment, because as much as I hated myself for what I'd said, I hated him a little too, for hearing it. For making me feel like I was the only one at fault for everything. By the time I went to bed, Kevin still wasn't home. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything that had happened. And for the first time, I started to wonder if we were even going to make it through this. But then again, wasn't that his decision? He was the one who'd left me hanging. He was the one who refused to see his part in all of this. If he couldn't handle a little honesty, was that really my fault? The next morning, Kevin still wasn't home. The side of the bed was untouched, cold. And I couldn't tell if that knot in my stomach was guilt, or just the dread of having to deal with the fallout. Part of me wanted to text him, maybe send a quick apology and hope it would be enough to smooth things over. But another part of me, the stubborn part, felt like I shouldn't have to. Not until he acknowledged his part in this mess too. I dragged myself out of bed and went through the motions of getting ready for the day. Coffee, shower, makeup, every little task felt heavier than it should have, like I was wading through molasses. I couldn't stop replaying our argument in my head, overanalyzing every word, every pause, every moment of silence. And no matter how I spun it, I couldn't decide if I was the villain in this story or just the scapegoat. By the time I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee, my phone buzzed. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Kevin. But it was just a text from Lisa. "Lisa, you okay? Did he come home?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Was I okay? Not really. Did he come home? Obviously not. But admitting that felt like a defeat. So I typed back something vague. We talked. It was rough. But I think we'll figure it out. It was a lie. And I hated how easy it was to type ... But I wasn't ready for anyone else to weigh in on what had happened. Not yet, especially not Lisa. She meant well. But she had a way of twisting things into drama. And the last thing I needed was more of that ... The hours dragged on, and I kept myself busy with chores I'd been avoiding for weeks, cleaning out the closet, scrubbing the bathroom tiles, even tackling the overflowing junk drawer in the kitchen. Anything to keep my mind off Kevin, what he might be thinking, where he might be, and whether he was coming back. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the thoughts kept creeping in. Was he sitting in his car somewhere, fuming? Was he at a friend's house venting about me the way I'd vented about him? Or worse, was he at a bar, drowning his anger in whiskey and flirting with some woman who didn't call him fat and ugly behind his back? That last thought hit me harder than I expected. The idea of Kevin being with someone else, even just in a fleeting, meaningless way, made my chest tighten. Not because I thought he'd actually do it. Kevin wasn't the type. But because it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I didn't want to lose him. As much as I'd complained, as much as I'd vented and ranted and nitpicked, the thought of him walking away for good was unbearable. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I grabbed my phone and texted him. Can we talk? Minutes passed, then an hour, no response. I checked my phone obsessively, even though I knew he wouldn't answer right away. Kevin wasn't the kind of guy who rushed into things, especially not emotional conversations. He liked to take his time, think things through. It was one of the things that used to annoy me about him. But now, I found myself wishing he'd just pick up the phone and yell at me if that's what he needed to do. Finally, just as the sun started to dip below the horizon, my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it in my rush to grab it. Kevin, I'll be home tonight. We can talk then. The relief was immediate but short-lived. Because now I had to face him, and I had no idea what I was going to say. When Kevin walked through the door later that evening, I was already sitting in the living room waiting for him. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn, and he didn't make eye contact as he set his keys down on the counter. The sight of him like that made my stomach turn. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, he spoke. Let's just get this over with. It wasn't exactly the warm opening I'd been hoping for, but I nodded and gestured for him to sit. He didn't. Instead, he stood there, arms crossed, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read: hurt, anger, disappointment. Maybe all of it at once. I've been thinking, he said, his voice calm but firm, and I need to know one thing before we go any further. I swallowed hard. Okay, do you really hate me, Meisner? He asked, his voice breaking just slightly on the last word. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. And for once, I didn't have an immediate answer. Because no, I didn't hate him, but I hated parts of him. The parts that made me feel ignored, overlooked, unimportant. And I hated the way those feelings had festered inside me, turning into resentment that spilled out in the worst possible way. No, I said, finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't hate you, Kevin, I swear I don't. But I've been unhappy, and instead of talking to you about it, I took the easy way out. I complained to my friends. And I said some awful things I didn't mean. I'm sorry for that, truly. He stared at me for a long time, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was weighing my words, trying to decide if they were enough, if I was enough. I appreciate the apology, he said finally, but it doesn't change what you said. And it doesn't change how I feel right now. I know, I said quickly, desperate to keep him talking. But I want to fix this, Kevin, I really do. I need you to meet me halfway. His brow furrowed, and I could tell he didn't like that. Meet you halfway, he repeated. Meisner, do you even realize what you're asking for? After everything you said about me? Kevin's words hung in the air like a challenge, and I knew he wasn't wrong. Asking him to meet me halfway probably sounded ridiculous after everything I'd said about him. But what was I supposed to do? Take all the blame and grovel at his feet? That wasn't me. I'd apologized, hadn't I? I'd admitted I was wrong. That should count for something. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I know I hurt you, Kevin. And I know I can't undo that. But I'm trying to be honest here. Things haven't been great between us for a while. And maybe I handled that the wrong way. But I can't fix this alone. We both have to work on it. His expression didn't soften, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to believe me, I could tell, but he wasn't ready to let go of his anger just yet. Work on it, he said, his tone almost mocking. You really think this is something we can just work on after what you said? After you told your friends I'm fat and lazy? He cut himself off, his jaw tightening. I don't even know if I can look at you the same way anymore. That stung more than I wanted to admit, but instead of backing down, I felt myself bristle. Oh, come on, Kevin, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You act like I committed some unforgivable crime. Yes, I said some horrible things, but you're not exactly blameless here. You've let this marriage coast for years. You stopped trying long before I did. His eyes widened, and I could see the anger bubbling up in him again. Don't you dare try to put this on me, he snapped. I might not be perfect, but I didn't sit around trashing you to my friends, Meisner. I didn't tell them I hated you, or think about leaving you for someone else. That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even realized he'd caught that part of the conversation, and now there was no hiding from it. My face flushed, and for a moment, I couldn't even meet his eyes. I wasn't serious, I said weakly. It was just a stupid offhand comment. I wasn't actually going to. Doesn't matter, he cut me off. The fact that you even thought about it says everything I need to know. His words left me reeling, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond, because deep down, I knew he was right. Even if I hadn't been serious, even if it was just a fleeting thought, the fact that it had crossed my mind at all spoke volumes about where we were as a couple, and where I was as a person. But I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. "Kevin, I know I've made mistakes," I said, my voice softer now, big ones, "and I know I've hurt you. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to end like this." He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't know if that's enough anymore, Meisner. I don't know if I can trust you, or if I even want to try." The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I felt the tears welling in my eyes. But I blinked them back, refusing to break down in front of him. "So that's it," I said, my voice trembling. "You're just going to give up on us, after everything we've been through?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he admitted. "But I need time, Meisner. I need space, to figure out if this is even worth saving." The finality in his voice sent a wave of panic through me. I wanted to grab him, hold him, beg him not to leave. But I didn't. Something in his expression stopped me. The way his shoulders sagged. The way he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was hurt, deeply. And I knew that no amount of pleading would fix that right now. So I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Okay," I said quietly. "Take all the time you need, but please, just don't give up on us completely." He didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence of our too big, too empty house. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the conversation in my head over and over again. And as much as I wanted to blame him for being distant, for letting himself go, for not meeting my emotional needs, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, this was my fault, at least most of it. But even then, as I sat there wrestling with my guilt and fear, another part of me refused to let go of my pride. Because admitting I was wrong, truly wrong, meant facing parts of myself I wasn't ready to deal with. My impulsiveness, my selfishness, my inability to take accountability, and that was scarier than losing Kevin. The house was quiet, too quiet. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alone.